Good evening. Mr. Shyam Benegal, our distinguished speaker for this evening, our Vice Chancellor, Professor Mushirul Hassan, students, colleagues, friends, and invited dignitaries. I welcome you to the annual Ajk Memorial Lecture. This lecture was started 3 years back in the memory of Mr. Anwar Jamal Kidwai, the founder of the Mass Communication Research Center of this university. Professor Mushirul Hassan, who was a close associate of Mr. Anwar Jamal Kidwai, is very much present here, and he kindly agreed to chair this session. I request him to speak a few words about Mr. Anwar Jamal Kidwai.
Mr. Shyam Benegal, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I wish I had been an associate of Anwar Jamal Kidwai. The matter is that I was not. I joined the university just as a young reader, associate professor, before he became the Vice Chancellor of the university, and I had the pleasure of talking to him mostly about the subject of my researches. We used to have heated arguments about nationalism. He had a very cynical view of Indian nationalism, which I did not share. I persuaded him to write a biography of Rafi Ahmed Kidwai, his cousin, and I discovered that he had already written about 3,000 pages of the biography, and every evening after work he would go back and look at his notes and then call me up and ask me for the selected works of Jawaharlal Nehru or the works of Patel and so on to document this or that. So I had very little to do with him as the Vice Chancellor of the university. My contacts and interactions were limited to our interest in exploring Indian nationalism. But I must say that one person who has, and I don't think I have ever made this confession, either in public or in writing, one of the persons who has influenced me enormously is Anwar Jamal Kidwai. I was impressed by him for a variety of reasons, one of them being his very deep commitment to the development of Jamia, which he did not know before coming here as Vice Chancellor. I think he had no contact whatsoever with the university or with its people. But once he joined this university, he worked tirelessly towards its development and wanted to give a new face to the university, which he managed to do by creating this mass communication center, by creating the engineering college, by setting up, which in a very Muslim milieu was a very novel idea, a working women's hostel, which flourishes at this point of time. He, of course, dissolved the old college system, replaced it with a faculty system. And these are very important achievements which most of us are either unaware of or don't attach sufficient significance to. And I think he set the university on the road to progress. I think the creation of the Mass Communication Center is really was a remarkable achievement, because I really saw him as somebody who's completely unexperienced with the ways these things happen. The struggle and the effort that he put in to mount this important center. I do, of course, remember the enormous opposition to him. Everybody called him names, accused him of doing this, accused him of doing that. And there were, I still remember, lots of agitations. University closed down for weeks and months because the Teachers Association was deadly and completely without any basis was against him. So there were all kinds of motives attributed to him. But of course the man was very strong, very defiant, and managed to get things done. I really feel that Jamia should have paid its tribute to the man, but as he himself used to say, quoting Vidal, that great men know that their names will not be remembered, or their names will be erased. Therefore, they built monuments so that their names are memorialized. Of course, Jamal Kidwai built no memorial or monument for himself, but I think he created a very vibrant legacy. I really think a very progressive legacy, a modern legacy, and we will do well to remember him. And I'm so happy that and I take credit for it, that I was able to institute this memorial lecture, and that we are able to invite such distinguished people like Shyam Benegal, who has incidentally been very, very closely associated with the, I'm aware of this, even though I have had nothing to do with the center, with the Mass Communication Center for a very, very long time. I used to hear how he sort of advised Jamal Kidwai. He guided as a member of the board of management also for on several terms. So he has been a source of great inspiration. And I'm sure Jamal Kidwai, if he were here in this auditorium, would have been very happy to welcome Shyam Benegal, who was such a marvelous individual and who's such an eminent filmmaker. And we were privileged to honor him last year at the convocation, and we are deeply honored to welcome him yet again on this happy occasion when we are celebrating our Founders' Day. Thank you for being with us, Shyam Benegal, and very welcome on behalf of our students and teachers.
Thank you, sir, very much for your valuable talk to us. Today's speaker, Mr. Shyam Benegal, has been making films for over 3 decades. And it is very unlikely that there is even one person in the audience who is not familiar with him or his films. He is the best-known name of the new wave who followed up success with his first film, Ankur, in '74, with 3 decades of filmmaking. It is very rare that someone who should have made film history in '74 should in 2000 be making box office history with the delightful and immensely successful film, Welcome to Sajjanpur. It is the story of this journey that we have gathered to hear today. Mr. Benegal has made film across many different genres. He has made some 1,500 advertisement films, about 50 documentaries, including one on Satyajit Ray, 22 feature films, and one of India's most ambitious TV serial, Bharat Ek Khoj. His film encompasses a rich diversity of subject that moves across time, history, and geographic location. He mapped significant movement in Indian history in the films like Junoon, The Making of Mahatma, and Bose, The Forgotten Hero. He explored marginal cultures in films like Arohan, Susman, and Trikal. In the films like Ankur, Manthan, Bhumika, Mandi, Hari Bhari, Sardari Begum, Mammo, Zubeda, he has dealt with issues of women empowerment. This is the reason that he has won many awards, honors. To name a few are 17 National Film Awards for his films, 2 Filmfare Awards, 2 awards at Moscow International Film Festival. An honor to him includes Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, Dada Saheb Phalke Award, honorary degree from Jamia Millia. Currently, he is member of the parliament, and also the best thing for us is that he has been associated with Mass Communication Research Center for the last 2 decades, and he has been guiding us in his best capacity as a filmmaker, as a professional, as a philosopher, and as a friend of Mass Communication Research Center. I request him to deliver this lecture on the topic, making the films he has made.
Good evening. It's really a great honor to be invited for this particular Ajk Kidwai Memorial Lecture. I knew Mr. Jamal Kidwai in the mid-70s when he was the Secretary of Information and Broadcasting. And I knew the kind of interest he used to take, particularly with the documentary film movement, because he was very involved with the work that Films Division was doing at that time, also with the Children's Film Society, because he had a great deal to do with the development of the Children's Film Society. Unfortunately, after he left, that went into a decline, tragically, because he really did a great deal to develop the Children's Film Society at the time. And I also remember, one thing that I vividly remember is that when emergency was declared, he said, the age of the barbarians is upon us. And I was just thinking, particularly after I read what Professor Mushirul Hassan had spoken yesterday, and he's been saying for the past couple of weeks, particularly after the Bartla House incident, the age of barbarians is now, not then. This is what it is now, and I wholeheartedly support what Professor Mushirul Hassan has been saying all these many days. But before I begin my talk, I really must tell you what led me to actually become the kind of filmmaker I did. I always wanted to make films. From the very beginning, I wanted to make films. From everybody knows, from the time I was really 6 or 7 years old, but that's hardly the point. The point was that I really didn't know the roadmap to the kind of films I wanted to make. 2 incidents took place in the mid-50s when I was a student. One of them was there was a film that Satyajit Ray had made called Pather Panchali. And this was released in 1955. And I happened to be in Calcutta at the time when that film was released. I didn't know anything about it. I had gone with my university swimming team for the inter-university swimming championships. I had an uncle in Calcutta who said, listen, you're so interested in the cinema, why don't you go and see this particular film? Because this is a film that I'm sure you will like, and you will not have anything to criticize when you see this film. And I went to see the film, and what really happened to me then was like an explosion in my brain, because it suddenly told me immediately that there was no reason for me to follow any kind of convention of filmmaking that we were following in our country, or some of the major film industries of the world, like Hollywood and so on and so forth, of which I was very passionately fond of those films, that one did not have to follow any of that. You could actually make your own path. If you knew how to tell a story, then you could make your own film. It was as simple as that. And Pather Panchali really was a film that eventually I saw. On that particular visit to Calcutta, I saw it about 12 times and eventually saw it 26 times. largely because to me it was something that was so different from any film that I had seen ever before. The only thing that came very close to it were a couple of the neorealist films from Italy which had come before Pather Panchali was made, one of them being Bicycle Thieves, which was, again, a film that impressed one a great deal, like it did for anybody who saw it at that time. But Pather Panchali was something very special because it suddenly smelt of the earth. It was real, it was about real people, it was about the earth that you and I knew, it was about human beings that we all recognized, it was about relationships that we all experienced, and so on. Now that was something that was so extraordinary. I said, this is the only path that I can possibly take as a filmmaker. The second thing that happened was the inter-university youth festivals used to take place during those days. I don't know whether they still are on now, but there used to be these inter-university youth festivals, and the university contingents from different universities all over the country used to bring theatrical groups, musicians, dancers, and so on and so forth, and congregate at Talkatora Gardens, which was the venue for it for a whole week. And it was invariably inaugurated by the Prime Minister of that time, Jawaharlal Nehru. And I remember that every time he came to speak, the two inter-university youth festivals that I attended, and he always had something very interesting to say. And this particular youth festival, I remember, was in the year 1957. It was winter of 1957. And he immediately decided that he was, because he used to talk a lot on developmental issues, and the second five-year plan was going on at the time, and a whole lot of things of that kind he used to talk about. But suddenly he decided that he was going to talk about communications. And he said, it's very important to understand that there are different kinds of communications, and the most important one of them, he said, is subliminal communications. Now, this was a term that nobody had heard. And about that time, there was a book called The Hidden Persuaders that had been published. In the advertising fraternity was reading up this book about how to sell products to people who didn't want them. And then the term Hidden Persuaders was one of those terms that came out, that was used to describe one of these books that was written at that time. Now, Nehru talked about subliminal communications as a method, as a means of making that transition from what Indian society, which is essentially traditional, would move into modernity and into an egalitarian mode through this process, which would be the least painful of processes. I couldn't quite understand what he was saying, but it struck me as being something quite significant in the manner in which perhaps cinema could be used. And these were the two things that constantly remained as a kind of guiding principle for me when I started to make films. Of course, immediately after I came out of the university, the first thing I did was to make advertising films, because it was the only way I could learn how to make movies, how to learn the craft of filmmaking, and also to learn the economy of expression. But when I started making documentaries, I realized that it was a method, there was a means you could use, because it was very important to, you see, a lot of us, when we make films, we make so many different kinds of messages and statements are made through the film. But often there are messages that we often did not intend to make that come in. And these messages that come in often work against what you're doing consciously. And these are on subconscious levels which work in many, many different ways. And recently I've been watching that a lot of filmmakers, say for instance the kind of films, the film called, Ram Gopal Verma makes a whole lot of very, very popular and very powerful films. And one of the interesting things is that when he makes these films, these are very powerful. They get the audience totally captivated and so on and so forth. But what it leaves you with is that the only way the world can be made to change is through vigilante action. And this is not something that he intends. This is no intention on his part. It is what emerges from that particular film. And this kind of emergence, because there are filmmakers who use that kind of technique and method and so on and so forth. But as far as I know, after discussing with him, Ram Gopal Verma doesn't intend to make films of that kind, meaning he does not laud vigilante action, but every one of his films, what you take home with you is this concept. And this obviously is on a level that even he is totally unaware of. What's happening? Somebody said something? No? Yeah. All right. Anyway, now, for me, as I said, this was basically what it was. The whole point of it was that I had to make films that would be essentially my own films, in the sense that I wasn't willing to mimic anybody. And secondly, that if I were to get messages across of any kind, it would be of a kind that I was totally aware of, subconsciously as well as consciously. So even if there were subliminal messages going through, they would be something that I would have to understand, which means that you have to be very aware of the entire cultural milieu in which you're functioning, because there is a lot in that cultural milieu that comes through either symbolically or through association, so many different ways. These things come without your often thinking about it. And unless you become actually conscious of this, you are never aware of what the effect of all that is going to be. And this is something that I have always paid very special attention to from the very beginning. And when you say, let me look at some of the films that I have worked with, to start off with. My first film, Ankur, which was based really on the fact that, I grew up in a what one might call a kind of border between a cantonment, which was the Sikandrabad cantonment, and what was otherwise the Hyderabad Nizam's dominions outside of that cantonment. So one was totally feudal and the other was colonial. So both these experiences were part of my growing up. And in this particular situation, one thing that always stood up very, very powerfully was that the oppressiveness of the feudal system, it was so strong that I remember watching when a landlord calling somebody to do something for him, because most of them were serfs and it was begar work, it wasn't paid for work, and calling somebody, a farmhand, to help him with something while the farmhand was having his cup of tea. And because he didn't give up his tea immediately, he whipped him with his belt. He really mercilessly whipped him. Now, those were the kind of images that stuck in my mind that eventually came into a film like Ankur, because Ankur itself was based on a story that I had written when I was in college as a short story, which eventually developed itself into a script. And I saw that as part of the whole idea of change that was taking place as I was growing up. And this particular change has never been pleasant or in any way stabilizing, because all change essentially is destabilizing, and the process of change must be seen as one that is destabilizing. And therefore, whether I made Ankur or after that when I made Nishant, it was the same principle on which the whole thing was done. That was, then came, of course, one of the things, because I was making documentaries at the time, and when I was doing documentaries, one of the documentaries I was making was a film about the whole business of milk cooperatives that were developing all over the country under the National Dairy Development Board, which was run by Dr. Kurian. Now, when I was making this documentary, one was coming across a whole lot of case studies, very interesting case studies, and these case studies were such that it demanded not so much a documentary which would be only seen by those sympathetic to the cause, but it would lead to making a kind of fiction film that would help in getting the largest possible audience to come and see the film, but it would have to be developed in a manner in which people would be willing to see the film. Not see it as a documentary, but see it as a film that would offer them a kind of experience that they would look forward to when you see an entertainment film. And this, of course, we made, and it was made, everybody knows that it was made by contributions from farmers and so on and so forth. But what is interesting is that that particular film, which was designed actually to motivate people to form cooperative societies, succeeded in doing that. It was one of the few film examples that I can give where, in fact, it succeeded. And this film was used in many, many different ways. It was used in the cinemas for a paying public. Then it was used for, congregation of farmers in different communities, different milkshed areas of the country. Then it was also shown as in a Super 8 format, in the 16 millimeter format, and eventually in a video format. And after that, it went beyond into another area altogether, which was to use this film in countries in Africa and Latin America and China and the Soviet Union also. So it was for me an incredible experience to see that a film like this could in fact communicate itself in many different parts of the world, not only in our world, but many different parts of the world, and was in fact an incredible success in communicating itself to an audience. Now, after that, of course, I never really attempted to do anything that would be of this nature, except perhaps when I made a film called Susman, which didn't really quite work, because it was also designed to bring to the fore the problems of the handloom weavers, who happen to be the second largest community, of trained community in our country after the farmers. And then this film, which was also similarly produced, all the cooperatives, the weavers cooperatives put money into the film, to the making of the film, but it never really got released, never really did well, except to be seen in small groups and to win a national award or two. So but the fact of the matter was that with Manthan, it was one of those very unusual things that happened, and I don't believe that it's always possible to do that sort of thing, that it would work like that. So those were some of the films that one made of that kind. But then, when we talk about films, one of the things is that my essential concerns, which have been ones that all of you have, largely the same kind of concerns. It's empowerment of women, it's the problems of the caste system, the Dalit problems, so on and so forth. Because recently, about 10 years ago, I made a film called Summer. And this particular film dealt with an incident, because Harsh Mandar, who was at one time an IAS officer, and when he was, I don't know whether he was a district magistrate or what he was in a district, he had collected a whole lot of stories relating to Dalit atrocities that were taking place even 50 years after, the whole reservation system in the country began. And this particular incident that I chose was one that had taken place in 1991 in the Sagar district of Madhya Pradesh, in Bundelkhand area. And to deal with the story directly, because the way I had done it in Ankur was to deal with the subject very directly. And when you deal with the subject directly like that, there is it comes very quickly to its saturation point. If you repeat that technique, you are likely to be losing. You will definitely lose the edge. And most people would say, I've seen this before. So the idea was to get to the root of the problem. And in this case, it was a little story about an atrocity about a young Dalit whose wife was very sick, and he took a sort of what's the word? He took a mannat in order that if she got well, that he would place a flag in the Ram temple in his village, which he did. When he did that, the priest saw him and beat the hell out of him, called the entire village, and the sarpanch decided that the only way he would be punished was to piss on his head in front of the entire village. Now, this is the actual incident that took place in 1991. I went to this village in 1998, and having gone to the village, I saw exactly what was happening. The sarpanch who had done this particular thing, there was a Jan Adalat in which he was to be sentenced, but he ran away. And so he absconded. He was not there to be found in the village, but his family was there. And they were very anti the film. They didn't want this film to be made. But the rest of the village was perfectly happy. We were having problems, like we would get stones thrown on us when we were shooting, particularly at nights and things like that. But all that was really not terribly important. But what was important was that I wanted to tell a story in a slightly different way as to what is the attitude towards Dalits today, both not only in the Indian village, but also in urban India. So I chose a technique by which I would have a film unit going from Bombay to shoot this film with actors, the story of this film with actors, while the real people in the village who they were supposed to play are already there and watching this film being made. So their response to the incidents and the actors' response to the same incidents. And so the film unit takes as the main protagonist of the film a Dalit from the city. And his response is so different from the one, the village Dalit, that it's an extraordinary circumstance where the person living in the city can only look at the Dalit experience in the village as simply as a matter of, as you can only see it with a sense of pity. And there's always a patronage involved in the way you look at it. So instead of strengthening the Dalit, you weaken him. So, and the village Dalit who is used to this, because the Dalit from the city was not used to it, because he's not being discriminated against where he is in his situation, he cannot see, because he looks at the world exactly from the point of view of urban Indian, while the Dalit in the village is quite the opposite, and the Dalit in the village actually is looking at it because he has to have the strength to bear it. Otherwise, he will be lost totally. And so those kind of juxtapositions became very important for me if we had to tell the story now, as against 50 years ago. So it was very important to do this kind of thing. And this has always been now, for me, the constant challenge that if one has to deal with these subjects often over and over again, you have to look at it from a point of view which will give you a newer kind of insight into the problem rather than tell us the same old story in the same old way. And this, which is one of the reasons I don't deal with these subjects too much. Now recently, my last film, for instance, called Welcome to Sajjanpur, is a story, again, I decided that after many years, because, Hindi films, as you know, has not visited the village in a long, long time. For the last 10 or 12 years, you haven't seen a single film about an Indian village. It has just fallen off the sightlines. It is no longer on our visual horizon. So I said it is important for me to revisit a village because I do believe that that part of India also needs to have, needs to be looked at once again. But if I was going to look at that part of the world, it would simply be a matter of looking at it in what one might call either in a nostalgic way or in a way which the way the newspapers carry stories about villages, which is just of unspeakable horrors. So I said, I can't do any of this because, first of all, if I'm doing a film about a village, clearly, if I want to have urban people looking at that film, it has to be in a form that they will accept to see it in the first place. So it had to be designed as a comedy. And having designed it as a comedy, then I could revisit all the different situations that are part of contemporary Indian village, including the technologies that are moving there, the manner in which things happen, and also the problems of low literacy, honor killings, a whole lot of the problems that we know are part of the Indian village. Luckily for me, that film succeeded and did extremely well. Now, as I keep talking to you, I'm thinking that what am I going to be doing in the future? What are the kind of films one has to deal with? One situation after another. In my case, of course, I have made a whole lot of films, but just now I'm embarking once again on a kind of comedy which deals, of course, now not so much with social satire, but totally with political satire. Because I do believe that I'm getting a kind of insight into it from the kind of position in which I am now placed. I don't think I have very much more to say. Thank you very much.
I thank the guest, Mr. Shyam Benegal, and our Vice Chancellor, Professor Mushirul Hasan, for sparing his valuable time for this session. And I'm also thankful to my colleagues who have been involved in organizing this session, to the faculty members and to the staff who did all the work that was required for it. And I'm thankful to all the audience who were very peacefully and calmly listening to his talk. I'm sure the share of his ideas and values that he has will inspire you also to do something like him. So thank you very much. Next year again with some other topic, with some other very eminent person, we will hear another memorial lecture. Thank you very much.